Greeting everyone. In today's video, we will be looking at the very last skill of the four, which is writing skill. Before we go deeper into this chapter, there is just one question regarding writing skill, and that is, why don't people learn to write naturally as they learn to talk? You see, being able to write is one thing, but knowing how to write is another. And that is something that seems to be an obstacle for most people. Even if they write in their own language, they still seem to struggle to write coherently, right? Or accurately. That is why we have people who can't write at all, to good writers, and to excellent writers. So what separates writers into these categories, these groups, and what do teachers need to know in order to best teach writing to learners, especially of English? So let us attempt to answer these questions and perhaps explore further as we go deeper into this very last skill of the four. Let us take a look at the characteristics of written work or language from the perspective of a writer. Firstly, the written language is permanent. What do we mean by that? You see, a writer, especially a student writer, may think that after he or she writes something down and then has to present or show to their teacher, it also comes with a sense of doubt or a lack of confidence in their own final product. They may question, is it good enough? What will the teacher think about it? Have I written correctly? And so on and so forth. So before students submit their final form of their writing, we as teachers should always make sure that we get to facilitate or help them at least revise their writing, refine it before releasing the final product, the final form of their writing. Because once it is released, it is permanent, it stays there. So that is what scares students so much when it comes to releasing their writing product. The second characteristic of the written language is its production time, which basically means the time that students have in order to produce their writing. Here's the thing, writing is a process, right? It is a process and it takes time to write or produce a good piece of writing. There are many steps before the final product comes out, such as brainstorming, outlining, revising, reviewing, and more. So students may be given time to go through that process, but they unfortunately don't have that much time in an exam, for example. So the best bet for us as teachers is to let students have sufficient practice with writing with a limited time to get them familiar with writing under a time limit. So whenever they have to write in an exam or for display, they do not have to spend so much time going through such process because they're already familiar with how much time they have in order to produce their writing. The third characteristic is distance. So what does distance refer to in writing? Well, you can define it as the distance between the writer and the readers. It still doesn't tell us exactly what it is, but to put it simply, in writing, writers, student writers, have to know who they write for, or their audience, who are going to read their writing. We know that readers can come from all walks of life with different background and culture. As a result, writers need to predict what their audience may feel after reading their writing. That is why the choice of words, the culture behind the writing, right? The message, the knowledge that can be interpreted or implied differently by many people should be considered, highly considered by the writers themselves. The fourth characteristic of writing is orthography. So, what is orthography? The word itself refers to the system of writing in a language, and that includes the rules of spelling or other special symbols that exist in that language. So the teaching of spelling or symbols of English can be quite challenging for, teachers. Some students are what we call illiterate, or they don't know how to write. Teachers should start from the basics of that writing, right? Such as learning or teaching them the alphabet, for example. So they have to start with the foundation, right? Getting students to start writing letters down before they move on to words, and then words to sentences. If your students are already literate, then you should instead think about giving them some attention to symbols in English, because the symbols in, let's say, Khmer aren't the same as the symbols in English. So even though they know how to write, they should be given some attention when it comes to differences in symbols in both languages, native and English respectively. Another characteristic number 5, is the complexity of written language. Students need to avoid, repeating the same words all the time, right? They have to learn to use various structures, sentence structures to be exact, various vocabularies, and all these sorts of things. And that's what makes writing complex, because knowing how to write, like I said, is okay, but writing a good piece of writing is another, and that is where complexity comes into play. Another characteristic, which is the last one, oh, not the last one, it's vocabulary. Yeah, it plays a huge role in writing, like I said, because we need to have rich vocabulary in order to prove that we are competent language users. And of course, last but not least, and that is formality. This helps students a lot when they go higher in their language learning, because they learn how to write, to describe, to write to explain, right? To write to compare or contrast, or maybe defend or argue in a formal way. Formality here refers to the formal structures of these types of writing, because academically writing comes in different types, and each type has its own structure, its own formal construction that most writers generally have to follow, and that is what we refer to when it comes to formality in writing, and that is the outline, the structures, the construction of these types of writing. So apart from the written language or written work, we also need to take into account the micro skills for writing. Like I said, writing is complex, and to produce a good piece of writing, there are some small components that writers need to be aware of when they, start writing down sentences. So that is when we have to look at the micro skills for writing. And again, you should spend some minutes going through the 12 micro skills for writing that are needed in order to make your writing good, right? We have from producing the right orthography patterns of English, right? Spelling, sentence structures, right? We have to produce writing at an efficient rate of speed to suit the purpose. For example, if you have to sit in an exam, so how fast or how slow do you want your writing to go? You need to think about the core of words and use appropriate word order patterns and all these sorts of things like grammar, tenses, okay, cohesive devices, and all these sorts of things. They have their own role in making your writing that much better. So spend some time going through these as I won't, right? So spend some time going through these. They are not that hard to understand.